So, if you're an architect working in the cloud today, you have definitely faced this problem. You've got to build across multiple platforms, but how on earth do you manage all that complexity? Today, we're going to demystify Kubernetes in a multi-cloud world, and not just how to use it, but just as importantly, when you should probably leave it on the shelf.
I mean, if you've ever tried to deploy and manage an application across AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, you know the feeling, right? It gets complicated, and it gets complicated fast. Each one has its own set of rules, its own unique services, and its own way of doing things. It's a massive headache, for sure.
Okay, so let's really dig into this. What is the multi-cloud challenge? What is the fundamental problem that we as architects are actually trying to solve here? Why is this so hard in the first place? Well, think of it this way. AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. They're like three different countries, and each one speaks its own unique language. So if you build your application to be totally fluent in, say, AWS, it can't just pack up and operate in Azure without a complete and painful re-engineering effort. This is what we call vendor lock-in, and it creates these huge operational nightmares.
So, if our clouds are all speaking different languages, how do we create a common tongue, a universal translator? This is exactly where our solution comes in. Let's talk about Kubernetes, which I honestly think is the universal adapter for the cloud.
At its heart, yeah, Kubernetes is an orchestrator for containers. You know, those little packages that bundle up an application's code with all of its dependencies. But a much better way to think about it is as a universal operating system for the entire cloud. It creates this consistent layer of abstraction, so your app doesn't even care if it's running on AWS or Azure or Google. It just needs to speak Kubernetes. And the power of this universal OS really boils down to three big things. First up, portability. You package your app one time, and you can run it absolutely anywhere that Kubernetes is installed. Second, the ecosystem. It's open source with this massive active community, so it plugs into almost any tool you could ever need. And finally, and this is a big one, skills. Your team only has to learn one system, and that knowledge applies across every single cloud. Okay, so now we get why Kubernetes is so valuable. Let's get practical. How do you actually run this thing in the real world? And that brings us to choosing your cloud platform.
The good news is you don't have to build Kubernetes from scratch. The major cloud providers all offer it as a managed service. Amazon's EKS is kind of the mature market leader, which makes it a super safe bet if you're already deep in that AWS ecosystem. Microsoft's AKS is a really strong choice for enterprise environments, especially if you have hybrid cloud setups or are dealing with Windows containers. And then there's Google's GKE. It was the original, so it's often the most feature-rich and innovative, making it fantastic for cutting-edge AI and machine learning workloads.
We've talked a lot about the power of Kubernetes, right? But a great architect knows that the most powerful tool isn't always the right one. So let's explore our final section here, when simpler is better. This is a principle that every single architect should have tattooed on their brains, seriously. Using Kubernetes for a simple little task is like, well, it's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Sure, it'll get the job done, but you're going to create a huge mess and a ton of unnecessary overhead in the process. Let's make this really concrete with a scenario. Imagine you're building a simple API. Maybe it's a webhook that just listens for an event and then performs one small action. It gets a burst of traffic maybe once an hour, but it's totally idle the rest of the time. Does that really need an entire Kubernetes cluster? Setting that up would be a massive overinvestment of both your time and your money. So you see, it's all about matching the tool to the job. Kubernetes is absolutely perfect for complex, mission-critical applications that need really advanced orchestration and scaling. But for that simple event-driven API we were just talking about, something like a serverless function like AWS Lambda is a much, much better fit. You only pay for what you use, and you manage zero infrastructure. It's a no-brainer. And that brings us to the final question that you, as an architect, really need to be asking yourself. The question isn't, is Kubernetes a good tool? Because we know it is. The real question is it the right tool for this specific job? So as you plan your next project, take a step back. Is it a complex build that truly needs the power of a Kubernetes-sized hammer? Or is it a simple nail that just needs a lighter touch? Choosing wisely, that is the mark of a great architect.